The black balloon disintegrated, and to the 200 socialites in the ballroom, it was supposed to be the moment they learned the sex of the miracle baby. But as the rubber shredded, the air wasn't filled with pink or blue confetti. It was filled with evidence. Thousands of glossy 4x6 photographs fluttered through the air, slapping against the marble floor with a sharp, rhythmic sound. A woman in a Dior gown gasped, instinctively catching one of the falling slips. Her face went pale as she looked at a high-definition, night vision shot of Clara, the city's beloved philanthropist, in the back of a car with Julian, Ethan's best friend and business partner. Ethan stood perfectly still in the center of the stage, the silver needle still glinting in his hand. He watched as his wife's face transformed from a rehearsed mask of joy to a twitching mess of confusion and horror. "Ethan?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rising murmur of the crowd. He didn't look at her, he looked at the floor where the pictures were settling. Along with the photos were highlighted bank statements showing the systematic drain of $20 million from their company, Aegis, into a private account in the Cayman Islands. "The results are in, Clara," Ethan said. "I know all about your scandal." He turned to the crowd, his eyes landing on Julian, who was backed against a catering table, looking for an exit that wasn't there. "Julian," Ethan called out, "you forgot to tell the board about the merger you and my wife were planning, the one where I ended up in a prison cell and you ended up with my chair." Clara finally found her voice, though it was jagged. "You've lost your mind. This is a psychotic break. Someone call security." "Security is already here," Ethan replied in a low, dangerous tone. The massive mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. 8 men in dark suits and tactical vests marched in, their boots echoing like drum beats. The guests scrambled back, champagne spilling onto the white silk of the tablecloths. Ethan stepped off the stage, walking toward the lead agent. "The embezzlement records are all on those sheets, every wire transfer, every forged signature." The agent didn't look at the papers. He looked at Ethan. "Mr. Walker, we aren't here for financial crimes." Ethan paused, a cold needle of dread pricking his spine. "What?" "We have a warrant for your arrest," the agent said, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt, "in connection with the hit-and-run death of Marcus Thorne." The room blurred. Marcus Thorne was Julian's younger brother. He had died 3 years ago when a black SUV ran him off the road on a rainy Tuesday. The case had gone cold. Clara stepped forward, the panic suddenly gone from her eyes. She smoothed her white dress, a slow, terrifying smirk spreading across her lips. She leaned in close to Ethan, her breath smelling of the expensive lilies that decorated the hall. "I knew you were digging, Ethan," she whispered so only he could hear. "I've known for months. Did you really think I'd let you ruin me? I'm the one who kept the dash cam footage from that night, the footage that shows you behind the wheel." "I wasn't driving that night, Clara. You were. I was in London." "The GPS says the car was at the pier," she hissed. "And the facial recognition on the footage? It's your face, Ethan, clear as day. I made sure of it." Ethan lunged for her, his hands reaching for the woman he had loved for a decade. But the agents were faster. They tackled him, his face slamming into the cold marble. He was pinned against the floor, staring directly at one of the photos he had printed. A photo of Clara and Julian laughing. "Daddy?" Ethan's heart broke. His 5-year-old son, Leo, was standing by the buffet, clutching a stuffed elephant, his eyes wide with a terror no child should know. Julian stepped forward, putting a hand on Leo's shoulder. It wasn't a comforting gesture, it was a claim of ownership. "Don't look, Leo," Julian said, his voice booming with fake authority. "Your father is a very sick man, but don't worry, I'm going to stay with you and Mommy from now on. I'll be the man he couldn't be." Ethan roared, a sound of pure primal agony, as they dragged him toward the exit. The last thing he saw before the doors closed was Clara, picking up a glass of champagne, stepping over the evidence of her betrayal, and taking a calm, refreshing sip. The next 48 hours were a systematic erasure of Ethan Walker's existence. In the holding cell, the silence was louder than the ballroom. His lawyer, a man he had paid millions over the years, sent a junior associate to tell him that the firm was dropping him due to a conflict of interest. His bank accounts were flagged and frozen under the Patriot Act. By the second night, the board of Aegis had held an emergency session and stripped him of his title. He was a ghost before he was even convicted. When the cell door finally buzzed open on the third morning, a tired guard told him he was free to go. Bail had been posted by an anonymous source. Ethan walked out of the precinct into a freezing gray downpour. He was still wearing his tuxedo trousers and a torn dress shirt. He had no phone, no wallet, and no home. Clara had already filed for a restraining order, citing violent tendencies. He took a bus to the edge of the city, to a place no one in his current life knew about, a derelict industrial shack by the shipyards that had belonged to his grandfather. The air inside was thick with the smell of rust and old oil. He collapsed onto a pile of moth-eaten tarps, his body shaking with a mix of exhaustion and a rage so hot it felt like it was melting his bones. They had taken his company. They had taken his son. They had even tried to kill his father. He had received a brief, terrifying call that his father had been moved to a state ward after suspicious narcotics were found in his room at the care facility. A faint blue light flickered in the corner of the shack. Ethan frowned, pushing himself up. On an old wooden workbench sat a brand new burner phone. The screen was glowing. There was one unread message. The dash cam footage is a deep fake, Ethan. Julian didn't kill his brother, Clara did, and I'm the only one who has the original file. Ethan's fingers trembled as he picked up the phone. He typed, "Who is this?" The reply came seconds later, "A ghost. Look in the mailbox." Ethan ran to the rusted metal box outside the shack. Inside was a small velvet bag. He poured the contents into his palm. It was a heavy gold signet ring. He recognized it instantly. It belonged to Sarah Thorne, Julian's missing wife. The world believed she had suffered a mental breakdown and fled to a commune in Europe. Under the ring was a note. "They think we're dead, Ethan. Let's show them what ghosts can do. Midnight, the Iron Lung Gym. Come alone." At 11:55 p.m., Ethan stood in front of a basement door in the worst part of the docks. The sign above it, the Iron Lung, was missing half its letters. He went down the stairs, the sound of rhythmic punching echoing against the concrete walls. The gym was a cavern of shadows, lit only by a few flickering fluorescent bulbs. A woman was working a heavy bag in the center of the room. Every strike was a crack of thunder. This wasn't the soft, socialite Sarah Thorne Ethan remembered. Her hair was buzzed short, and her arms were corded with lean, hard muscle. She stopped and looked at him. Her eyes were cold, like coins pulled from a frozen lake. "You look like hell, Ethan," she said. "I've spent 2 nights on a precinct floor," he replied. "Why am I here, Sarah? Where have you been?" She walked to a locker and pulled out a laptop, flipping it open. "I've been in a private wellness center in Switzerland. That's what Julian calls the prison he paid to keep me in. I escaped 6 months ago. I've been watching them, Ethan, waiting for someone they hated enough to destroy." She turned the screen toward him. It was a live feed of his own living room. Clara and Julian were sitting on his sofa, laughing over a bottle of wine. "They're merging the companies tomorrow," Sarah said. "And once the paperwork is signed, they're moving Leo to a boarding school in Switzerland, the same one next to my wellness center. You'll never see him again." Ethan lunged toward the door, his vision tunneling into a red haze of fury. Sarah moved with a speed he couldn't follow. She swept his legs out from under him and pinned him to the floor before he could even gasp. She leaned in, her face inches from his. "That rage is going to get you killed," she hissed. "You want to go there? They have 24-hour security and a police force in their pocket. You aren't a CEO anymore, Ethan. You're a felon on the run." She let him up, her expression softening just a fraction. "If you want your son back, if you want your life back, you have to stop being Ethan Walker." "Then who am I supposed to be?" Sarah reached into a crate and pulled out a stack of forged passports, bank cards, and a sleek black suit that looked like it cost more than a mid-sized car. You're going to be the man Clara Vance can't resist, Sarah said. A man with more money than Julian and more secrets than her. You're going to be Sebastian Vane, and you're going to make her fall in love with the man who's going to bury her. Ethan looked at the black suit, then at the image of Julian laughing in his house. He reached out and took the burner phone. When do we start? We already did, Sarah said, clicking a key on the laptop. I just outbid Julian for your private car collection using your new identity. He's currently throwing a fit in your foyer. Tomorrow you're going to walk into his favorite auction house and take the one thing he wants more than power, his pride. The transformation began with a blade. Sarah held the clippers, shearing Ethan's hair into a sharp, aggressive fade that changed the entire shape of his face. She taught him how to walk differently, not with the hurried, anxious stride of a tech CEO, but with the slow, predatory confidence of a man who already owned the room before he entered it. Ethan Walker cares what people think, Sarah said, adjusting the lapels of his charcoal gray Tom Ford suit. Sebastian Vane doesn't know they exist. Betrayal. The venue for the Legacy and Luxury auction was a refurbished cathedral, a place where the city's vultures gathered to bid on the remains of fallen empires. Today, the main event was the Walker Collection, Ethan's private fleet of vintage cars seized by the board of Aegis and put on the block to recover lost funds. Julian and Clara were already there, seated in the front row. They looked like royalty. Julian had his arm draped over the back of Clara's chair, his fingers idly playing with the diamonds at her neck. They were whispering and laughing, the image of a couple who had successfully committed a murder and gotten away with it. When the auctioneer announced the first lot, a 1963 Aston Martin DB5 that Ethan had spent 3 years restoring with his father, Julian's hand shot up immediately. 200,000, Julian called out, his voice smug. He looked around the room, daring anyone to challenge him. He wanted Ethan's soul, one car at a time. 300, a voice rang out from the back of the room. The crowd shifted. Ethan, now Sebastian, stood in the shadows of the arched doorway. He wore a pair of light-tinted spectacles and a beard that was groomed to perfection. He held a silver cane, not because he needed it, but because it gave him an air of eccentric, old-world wealth. Julian squinted, trying to peer through the dim light. 400,000, 600, Ethan replied instantly. The room stirred. This wasn't just bidding, this was an execution. Julian's face flushed a deep, angry red. He hated being challenged, especially in public. 750, Julian snapped. Ethan stepped forward into the light, his gaze locking onto Clara's. She didn't recognize him, but she was staring. He could see the curiosity sparking in her eyes, the exact obsession Sarah had predicted. 1 million, Ethan said calmly. The auctioneer's hammer fell before Julian could find his breath. The room erupted in whispers. Who was this man? As the auction continued, Sebastian Vane bought everything. The Ferraris, the Porsches, even the watch collection. By the time the final hammer fell, Julian had been humiliated. He had come to claim his trophies and had left with nothing but a bruised ego. As the crowd began to mingle, Ethan made his move. He didn't go to Julian. He went straight to Clara. He caught her at the champagne bar just as she was reaching for a glass. A woman with your eyes shouldn't drink the house vintage, Ethan said, his voice an octave lower than his natural tone, roughened by a practiced European lilt. Clara turned, her breath hitching. Up close, the disguise was even more effective. He looked like a dangerous, more refined version of the man she had destroyed. "And what should I be drinking, mister?" "Vane. Sebastian Vane," he said, signaling the bartender. He produced a bottle of 1996 Dom Perignon from a private cooler, a bottle Sarah had prearranged. "And you should be drinking something that matches the sharpness of your ambition, Clara." Her eyes narrowed. "You know my name?" "Everyone knows the woman who saved Aegis from her unstable husband," Ethan said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Though, between us, I've always found the villains more interesting than the heroes." Julian stormed over, his face twisted in a snarl. "I don't know who you think you are, Vane, but you just made a very expensive mistake. Those cars belong in my garage." Ethan didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes on Clara. Your associate seems very tense, Clara. Is he always this loud? Julian reached out to grab Ethan's shoulder, but Ethan moved with a fluid, terrifying speed Sarah had drilled into him. He caught Julian's wrist in a grip that looked effortless but was calculated to grind bone. Don't, Ethan whispered, the temperature in the room seeming to drop. I don't like being touched by people who can't afford me. He released Julian, who stumbled back, clutching his arm. Clara didn't move to help him. She was watching Ethan with a hunger that made his skin crawl. She was a predator, and she had just found a bigger one. We're having a gala on Friday, Clara said, ignoring Julian entirely. The Founders Gala. I'd like you to be there, Sebastian. We have things to discuss, business and otherwise. I'll consider it, Ethan said, giving her a curt nod before turning and walking away. Back at the shack, Sarah was waiting. She was sitting in front of a bank of monitors, her face illuminated by the glow of intercepted data. She's already checked your fake LinkedIn, your shell company's website, and 3 offshore bank registries I set up, Sarah said, a smirk on her lips. She's hooked. She thinks you're her ticket away from Julian. She didn't even check if he was okay, Ethan said, stripping off the suit. He felt dirty, like he needed to scrub the scent of her perfume off his soul. She just looked at me like I was a new piece of jewelry. That's the opening we need, Sarah said, her voice turning serious. Now we start the haunting. That night, the psychological warfare began. Clara was alone in the sprawling Walker estate, the house Ethan had built for her. Julian was out late, likely drinking away his humiliation at the auction. Clara sat at her vanity, removing her earrings when the lights flickered. A soft hum began to vibrate through the house's integrated smart system. Aegis home status report, Clara commanded. Systems normal, Clara, a voice replied. But it wasn't the standard AI voice, it was a digital composite, layered with the subtle, unmistakable frequencies of Ethan's voice. Clara froze. Aegis? Repeat status? I'm right here, Clara, the speakers whispered. She spun around, but the room was empty. She looked at the massive floor-to-ceiling mirror. For a split second, the reflection didn't show her. It showed a translucent, grainy image of Ethan standing behind her, his face covered in blood from the night of his arrest. She screamed and threw a perfume bottle at the glass. The image vanished. The lights returned to a steady, warm glow. She scrambled for her phone and called Julian. Julian, he's here. Ethan is in the house. Clara, shut up. Julian's voice came through, thick with alcohol. Ethan is in a halfway house on the other side of the city. I have the GPS on his ankle monitor. He hasn't moved in 6 hours. I saw him, Julian, in the mirror. You're stressed. The auction was a disaster. Take a pill and go to sleep. He hung up. Clara sat on the floor, surrounded by broken glass and the scent of lilies. Across the city, in the dark shack, Ethan watched the feed from the hidden cameras Sarah had installed years ago as a backup security measure. He watched his wife tremble. Is it enough? Ethan asked. No, Sarah said, her eyes fixed on the screen. Panic makes people sloppy. We don't want her sloppy. We want her desperate. We want her to run to Sebastian Vane for protection. Over the next 3 days, the pressure increased. Every time Clara was alone, the haunting continued. Ethan's favorite song would play softly in empty rooms. The smell of his cologne would suddenly fill the hallway. Emails from do-not-reply@aegis.com would appear in her inbox, containing nothing but coordinates to the pier where Marcus Thorne had died. By Thursday, Clara was a wreck. She was snapping at the staff and accusing Julian of trying to drive her crazy to take her share of the company. The wedge was driven. The partners in crime were now enemies in hiding. On Friday morning, Ethan received a frantic text on the Sebastian Vane burner phone. Clara, Sebastian, I need to see you. Before the gala, Pier 9, please, I think I'm being followed. Ethan looked at Sarah. She was checking the slide on a compact 9mm pistol she kept tucked in her waistband. This is the pivot, Sarah said. She's going to offer you Julian's head on a silver platter to save herself. You need to lead her right to the edge. And Julian? I've sent an anonymous tip to Julian's phone, Sarah smiled grimly. telling him that his wife is at the pier, meeting a man to sign over his shares of the company. He'll be there, and he'll be armed. Ethan arrived at Pier 9 just as the sun was setting, casting long, skeletal shadows over the rusted shipping containers. The wind was biting, whipping the salt water against the concrete. Clara was waiting by the edge of the dock, huddled in a trench coat. When she saw Sebastian, she ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. "He's trying to kill me," she sobbed, the performance so perfect that for a second Ethan almost believed her. "Julian, he knows I'm talking to you. He's losing his mind." Ethan held her, his hands resting on her back. He could feel her heart racing. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear, mimicking the way she had whispered to him at the ballroom. "I can protect you, Clara," he murmured, "but I need the truth. I don't do business with liars." She pulled back, looking into his eyes. "What truth?" "The hit and run. Marcus Thorne. I know it wasn't Ethan, and I know it wasn't Julian. It was you, wasn't it?" Clara's face went still. The sobbing stopped. She looked at him for a long beat, then a slow, dark smile crossed her face. "Julian was too drunk to drive," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "And Marcus was going to tell Ethan about the money we were taking. I did what had to be done. I'm a survivor, Sebastian. Are you?" "I am," Ethan said. "Then help me," she whispered, reaching up to cup his face. She pulled him into a kiss, a hard, desperate, poisonous kiss. In the distance, the sound of a car door slamming echoed through the pier. "Clara!" Julian's voice roared, full of drunken rage. Ethan pulled away, looking over Clara's shoulder. Julian was charging toward them, a handgun visible in his waistband. "Perfect," Ethan whispered, but not to Clara. Julian didn't hesitate. He pulled the gun from his waistband as he stumbled across the uneven concrete of the pier. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie loosened, the image of a man whose world was cracking at the seams. "Get away from him, Clara!" Julian screamed. Ethan didn't flinch. He kept his arm around Clara's waist, feeling the slight tremor in her body. It wasn't fear, it was excitement. She loved being the center of the wreckage. "Julian, put the gun down," Ethan said, maintaining the Sebastian Vane accent. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene? You're trying to take my company. You're trying to take my woman." Julian leveled the barrel at Ethan's chest. "I know who you are. I don't know where you came from, but nobody walks into this city and buys up the Walker estate without a motive." Clara stepped in front of Ethan, her voice pitch perfect in its desperation. "Julian, stop. Sebastian is helping me. He knows about the money. He knows about Marcus. If you kill him, everything comes out." The mention of Marcus Thorne acted like a physical blow. Julian's hand shook. "He knows? Because you told him, you stupid bitch." "I told him because you were going to let us drown," she countered. Ethan leaned in, whispering to Clara, "Go to the car. I'll handle him." As Clara backed away toward the shadows, Julian took a step forward, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You aren't going anywhere, Vane." Suddenly, a red laser dot appeared on Julian's forehead. It danced across his skin, steady and cold. Julian froze. He looked toward the top of a nearby shipping container. Sarah Thorne stood there, silhouetted against the rising moon, holding a long-range rifle. "Drop it, Julian." Sarah's voice echoed through the pier, amplified by a headset. Julian's jaw dropped. "Sarah?" "The wellness center had a security flaw, Julian," she called down. "It's called money, and I have more of it than you do now." Julian looked from the sniper to Ethan, and finally back to Clara, who was already halfway to the SUV. He realized then that he was the only one not in on the joke. He lowered the gun, his shoulders slumping. "Check your phone, Julian," Ethan said, dropping the accent. His real voice, cold and familiar, cut through the salt air. Julian looked at the screen. It was a live broadcast notification. Sarah had already leaked a 30-second clip of the pier conversation, Clara's confession about Marcus. To the city's largest news outlet, it was trending. "The gala is in 2 hours, Julian," Ethan said, stepping closer until the barrel of Julian's gun was touching his own chest. "The board will be there. The feds will be there. You have 2 choices. You can run and be hunted for the rest of your life, or you can show up and try to survive." Ethan walked past him, leaving Julian standing in the dark. The Founders' Gala was the crown jewel of the social season. The ballroom of the Aegis Tower was a cathedral of glass and steel, looking out over the city Ethan had built. Clara was in the dressing room, her hands shaking as she touched up her lipstick. She had seen the news. She knew the Marcus clip was out there, but she was convinced she could spin it. She just needed Sebastian. Sebastian was her shield. A knock came at the door. "Enter," she snapped. It was Sebastian. He looked impeccable in a midnight blue tuxedo. He carried 2 glasses of champagne. "The crowd is waiting," he said softly. "The video, Sebastian. People are talking. The police are downstairs." "Let them talk," Ethan said, handing her a glass. "Once we announce the merger and our engagement, your legal team will bury that clip as an AI deepfake. Julian is the one they'll go after. I've already arranged for the original footage to be delivered to the DA, the one that puts the steering wheel in Julian's hands." Clara took a long, thirsty gulp of the champagne. "You're a monster, Sebastian. I love it." "I know," Ethan said. They walked out into the ballroom together. The music stopped. The golden couple was no more. Today, the room was buzzing about the new power player. Julian was standing by the stage, looking skeletal. He had tried to drink his way to courage, and it showed. Ethan stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan began, his voice booming. "Tonight was supposed to be about the future of Aegis, but before we look forward, we have to clear the ghosts of the past." He looked at Clara. She was smiling, waiting for the proposal, waiting for the victory, but then she frowned. She gripped the edge of the podium. Her breathing became shallow. "Sebastian," she whispered. "You told me once that you did what had to be done to survive," Ethan said, his voice dropping. "I wondered if that was true." On the massive digital screens behind the stage, the confetti photos from the gender reveal appeared, but then they changed. The screen showed a medical report: patient Clara Walker, procedure tubal ligation, date 5 years ago. The room gasped. "You lied about the baby, Clara," Ethan said. "But that's just a scratch. Let's talk about the poison." Clara tried to speak, but her throat felt like it was closing. She looked down at the champagne glass in her hand. "I didn't put anything in that glass, Clara," Ethan whispered, leaning close so the microphone didn't catch it. "But I told you Julian was planning to kill you tonight. I told you he bought a vial of neurotoxin. And when you saw that vial on the table in the dressing room, you didn't call the police. You put it in his drink, didn't you?" Clara looked at Julian. Julian was clutching his chest, his eyes bulging. He had just finished his own drink. "You both thought you were the smartest person in the room," Ethan said, stepping back from the mic. "I just gave you the tools to destroy each other." Ethan reached up and peeled away the prosthetic scar and the glasses. He stood tall, the lights hitting his face. "The neurotoxin was distilled water, Clara," Ethan said, his voice now amplified for the whole room. "But the fact that you both tried to use it, that's the real evidence." The doors burst open. This time, the feds weren't there for Ethan. Sarah Thorne walked in, flanked by the district attorney. "Clara Walker, Julian Vane," the DA announced. "You are under arrest for the murder of Marcus Thorne, corporate embezzlement, and attempted murder." As the handcuffs clicked, Clara looked at Ethan with a hatred that could have burned the building down. "You think you won? You're alone, Ethan. You have nothing." "I have everything," Ethan said. He walked past the guards, past the cameras, and out to the balcony. Sarah was waiting there. She handed him a tablet. On the screen was a live feed from a quiet park. His father was sitting on a bench, the sun on his face, and running toward him was Leo, clutching his stuffed elephant. "He's safe," Sarah said. Ethan looked out over the city. The Aegis logo on top of the tower flickered and died as the power was cut to the executive floor. "What now?" Sarah asked. Ethan took the signet ring from his pocket, the one Sarah had used to find him, and handed it back to her. "Now," Ethan said, "we build something that isn't made of glass." He turned and walked toward the elevators, leaving the ghosts of the ballroom behind. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at his wife being dragged away. He just looked at the photo of his son on the screen, and for the first time in a year, the architect of ruin smiled.